I pulled into the driveway of the sprawling ranch-style house on Maple Grove Avenue, expecting nothing more than a straightforward deck repair job: rotted boards, loose railings, maybe some staining work. Little did I know that over the next few days I'd discover something far more valuable than any paycheck, and hear words from a 51-year-old woman that would completely reshape how I viewed relationships, second chances, and what it really means when someone decides not to let a good thing slip away. The morning sun was already climbing high over the quiet neighborhood of Willowbrook. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Casting long shadows across manicured lawns and well-maintained driveways, it was one of those picture-perfect suburban streets, where every house seemed to tell a story of middle-class dreams realized to car garages, flower beds bursting with seasonal colors, and the kind of peaceful silence that only comes from a community where people actually know their neighbors' names. My name is Dylan, and I've been in the home repair business for about 8 years now. Started right out of high school when college didn't pan out the way my parents had hoped. While my classmates were studying for finals and worrying about student loans, I was learning the honest trade of working with my hands, fixing what was broken, building what was needed, and finding a strange satisfaction in transforming something worn and weathered into something beautiful again. I'm 32 now, and I've seen every type of home repair job you can imagine, from emergency pipe burst at 2 a.m. to elaborate custom built-ins that take weeks to complete. But this particular Tuesday morning felt different, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Maybe it was the unusually perfect weather, or the way the morning light hit the windows of the house as I approached. Or maybe it was just one of those days when life decides to surprise you, whether you're ready for it or not. The house itself was impressive, a sprawling ranch with natural stone accents and large windows that seemed to invite the outdoors in. The landscaping was immaculate, with native plants and carefully designed garden beds that suggested someone with both taste and patience lived here. The driveway was smooth asphalt without a crack in sight, and even the mailbox looked like it had been recently painted. But it was the back deck that had brought me here, and as I walked around to survey the job, I could see why the homeowner had called for help. The structure was solid, good bones, as we say in the business, but it had clearly seen better days. Several of the deck boards were warped and discolored, victims of too many harsh winters and scorching summers. The railing system was loose in places, and the entire surface looked like it hadn't been properly sealed in years. It wasn't dangerous exactly, but it was definitely tired. I'd gotten the call 3 days earlier from someone named Samantha Reed. Her voice on the phone had been professional but warm, with just a hint of what I'd later recognize as carefully controlled confidence. She'd explained that she needed the deck repaired and refinished before hosting a family gathering in a few weeks. Nothing urgent, she'd said, but she wanted it done right. She'd found my name through a recommendation from her neighbor, and after checking my references online, decided I was the person for the job. The estimate had been straightforward: to replace the damaged boards, reinforce the railing system, sand everything down, and apply a fresh coat of protective stain. A 3-day job. Maybe 4 if I took my time and paid attention to the details. The pay was fair, the timeline was reasonable, and the location was only 20 minutes from my apartment. As far as jobs went, it seemed ideal. I unloaded my tools from the truck, methodically arranging them the way I learned over years of experience: circular saw, power drill, orbital sander, various hand tools, and enough lumber to replace about 1/3 of the existing deck boards. The smell of fresh cut pine mixed with the morning air, and I felt that familiar anticipation that comes with starting a new project. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of a lawn mower and the occasional car heading toward the main road. Willowbrook was the kind of place where people left for work early and came home late, where weekends were for barbecues and garden work, where life moved at a pace that allowed you to actually notice things like the changing seasons and the way morning light shifted through the trees. I checked my watch: 7:45 a.m. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, a habit I developed over the years. It gave me time to really look at a project before diving in, to think through the sequence of work and anticipate any potential complications. But more than that, it showed respect for the client's time and property. In a business where so many contractors showed up late or not at all, punctuality had become one of my strongest selling points. As I measured the deck dimensions and made notes in my worn spiral notebook, I found myself wondering about the person who lived here. The house suggested success, not flashy wealth, but the kind of comfortable prosperity that comes from making smart decisions over time. The attention to detail in the landscaping and the quality of the windows and exterior finishes indicated someone who valued their home and took pride in maintaining it properly. But there were also small hints of a more personal story. A single chair on the front porch, positioned to catch the morning sun. Garden beds that were beautiful, but not overly elaborate, suggesting someone who enjoyed the work, but didn't have unlimited time for it. And something about the way the deck had been allowed to deteriorate slightly, not from neglect, but as if other priorities had taken precedence for a while. I was just finishing my initial assessment when I heard the back door open. I turned around, expecting to meet my client for the first time, completely unaware that I was about to encounter someone who would challenge everything I thought I knew about connection, timing, and the courage it takes to recognize something valuable when it appears in your life. The woman who stepped onto the deck was not at all what I'd expected. Samantha Reed moved with the kind of confidence that comes from years of experience in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. But there was also something warm and approachable about her presence. She was probably in her early 50s with shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the morning light and expressive green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that looked both casual and expensive, the kind of understated elegance that speaks to both good taste and financial security. "You must be Dylan," she said, extending her hand with a smile that was both professional and genuinely welcoming. "I'm Samantha. Thank you for coming so early. I know contractors usually prefer to start later, but I have some calls to make before the markets open." Her handshake was firm, the kind that immediately tells you you're dealing with someone who's used to being taken seriously. But there was also a warmth in her eyes that suggested she didn't take herself too seriously. "Not a problem at all," I replied, finding myself slightly more nervous than usual. "I'm always happy to work around a client's schedule. The early start actually works better for me. I can get more done before the heat really kicks in." "Perfect. Well, as you can see," she gestured toward the deck with a slight grimace, "this poor thing has seen better days. I've been meaning to address it for the past 2 years, but work kept getting in the way. Finally decided I couldn't postpone it any longer when I realized my daughter's engagement party is in 3 weeks." "Engagement party," I said, looking around the space with new eyes. "That's exciting. How many people are you expecting?" "About 40, she said, then paused and looked at me with a slight smile. "You know, it's funny. I spend most of my time managing other people's expectations and timelines, but when it comes to my own home, I'm apparently a world-class procrastinator." There was something self-deprecating about the way she said it, like she was sharing a private joke. I found myself smiling back without really thinking about it. "What kind of work do you do?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Investment consulting," she said. "I help people figure out what to do with their money when they have more than they know how to handle." It's more interesting than it sounds, but it definitely keeps me busy. Before I could respond, I heard a voice from the neighboring yard. Well. Samantha's finally getting that deck fixed." We both turned to see a woman in her 60s peering over the fence that separated Samantha's property from the house next door. She had silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and was wearing gardening gloves, clearly having been interrupted in the middle of some morning yard work. "Dylan, meet Rena Blackwood," Samantha said with a slight roll of her eyes. "My neighbor, unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator, and self-appointed keeper of everyone's business. Pleased to meet you," I called out politely. Rena studied me with the kind of thorough assessment usually reserved for job interviews or medical examinations. "You look sturdy enough," she said finally. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "How long you been doing this kind of work?" "About 8 years, I replied. "Good." The last contractor Samantha hired to fix her kitchen sink showed up 3 hours late and tracked mud through the whole house. I had to listen to her complain about it for weeks. That was 2 years ago. "Rena," Samantha said with exaggerated exasperation, "and you're the one who recommended him." "Well, how was I supposed to know he'd turn out to be unreliable?" Rena shot back. "He seemed perfectly competent when he fixed my garbage disposal." I couldn't help but smile at their banter. There was clearly a long history of friendship beneath the teasing, the kind of comfortable relationship that develops between neighbors who've weathered years of shared experiences. "Don't mind her," Samantha said to me, though loud enough for Rena to hear. "She's actually wonderful, but she thinks anyone under 50 is inherently suspicious." "I heard that," Rena called out. "And for the record, it's anyone under 40. Dylan here looks like he might actually know what he's doing." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," I said, genuinely amused. "Just don't make too much noise before 9 a.m., Rena continued. "Some of us are retired and actually trying to enjoy our golden years." "You're up at 6 every morning working in that garden," Samantha pointed out. "That's different." Garden work is peaceful. Power tools are not. With that, Rena disappeared back into her yard, leaving Samantha and me alone on the deck. She's actually a retired federal judge, Samantha explained quietly. 25 years on the bench, which explains both the interrogation skills and the tendency to offer unsolicited opinions about everything. A judge, I said, impressed. That's intimidating. Don't let her scare you off. She's harmless, and she makes incredible coffee. You'll probably end up being friends before the week is over. Samantha walked over to the railing and tested its stability, frowning slightly when it shifted under her weight. So, what's your honest assessment? Is this thing going to collapse during the party? I followed her over and examined the connection points more closely. It's not dangerous, but it definitely needs attention. Some of these bolts have worked loose over time, and a few of the boards are starting to split. Nothing that can't be fixed, though. Good. The last thing I need is my future son-in-law falling through the deck and deciding our family is to high maintenance. Future son-in-law causing you stress? I asked, then immediately wondered if that was too personal a question. But Samantha didn't seem to mind. Actually, he's wonderful. The stress is all coming from my daughter, who has somehow convinced herself that every detail of this party has to be absolutely perfect. You think we were planning a royal wedding instead of a casual backyard celebration. First engagement in the family, first everything in the family, she said with a laugh. Emily's my only child, and she's always been a bit of a perfectionist. Gets it from her mother, I'm afraid. There was something about the way she said it, both proud and slightly overwhelmed, that made me like her even more. She clearly cared deeply about making her daughter happy, but she also seemed to have a realistic perspective on what actually mattered. Well, I said, pulling out my measuring tape, let's make sure she has one less thing to worry about. By the time I'm done, this deck will be strong enough to handle anything you can throw at it. I like the sound of that, Samantha said, and for just a moment, I could have sworn there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't just talking about the deck. Once Samantha headed back inside to start her workday, I got down to the business of actually assessing what needed to be done. The morning air was still cool, perfect working weather, and I found myself settling into the familiar rhythm of a new project. I started by removing the loose deck boards, carefully prying up each plank and examining the underlying structure for any signs of rot or damage. The work was methodical, almost meditative. There's something satisfying about taking apart something that's broken and knowing you have the skills to put it back together better than it was before. As I worked, I could hear the distant sound of Samantha on a phone call through her open office window, something about quarterly projections and market volatility. Her voice carried that same confident tone I noticed earlier, but now it had the sharp edge of someone who was clearly in her element. Around 10:30, she appeared on the deck carrying a large glass of ice water and wearing a slightly apologetic expression. Sorry about that, she said, handing me the water. Conference call ran longer than expected. The Asian markets decided to have a nervous breakdown overnight, and everyone needed their hand held. I took a long drink of the water, which was perfectly cold and had a subtle hint of lemon. No problem at all, actually. It's nice to work without someone hovering over my shoulder asking if I'm doing everything right. Oh, I'm definitely going to be that client, she said with a laugh. Fair warning, I have control issues. Most successful people do, I said, then immediately wondered if that sounded presumptuous. But Samantha seemed pleased by the observation. You're probably right. 20 years of managing other people's money will do that to you. You learn that the details matter, and that most problems happen because someone didn't pay attention to something they thought was unimportant. I nodded, continuing to work as we talked. Same thing in construction. The difference between a job that lasts 5 years and one that lasts 50 usually comes down to taking time with the little things that nobody sees. Exactly, she said, settling into one of the patio chairs. Mind if I work out here for a bit? I have some reading to catch up on, and it's such a beautiful day. Your deck, I said with a smile. Though I should warn you, it's going to get noisy once I start cutting the new boards. I can handle a little noise. I used to have an office overlooking a construction site in downtown Chicago. Compared to that, this will be peaceful. She disappeared inside and returned a few minutes later with a laptop, a stack of papers, and a fresh cup of coffee. She settled at the patio table, reading glasses perched on her nose, looking every inch the successful executive. But there was something relaxed about her posture that suggested she was genuinely enjoying being outside. As I worked, we fell into an easy conversation. She told me about her daughter Emily, who was apparently a marketing director for a tech startup and had inherited her mother's perfectionist tendencies, along with her father's artistic sensibilities. The engagement party had been Emily's idea, but Samantha was the one handling the logistics because, as she put it, Emily can plan a brilliant marketing campaign, but ask her to coordinate catering and she breaks out in hives. What about Emily's father? I asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Sorry, that's none of my business. No, it's fine, Samantha said, looking up from her laptop. We divorced when Emily was 12. Amicable split, all things considered. David's a sculptor, very talented, but not exactly what you'd call reliable. When it comes to practical matters, he lives in Santa Fe now, makes beautiful art, and barely remembers to pay his phone bill. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a kind of resigned affection. That must have been hard, I said. Raising Emily mostly on your own. It was. But it was also liberating in a way. I didn't have to compromise on the important decisions. And Emily and I developed a really close relationship. Maybe too close. Sometimes. She still calls me 3 times a week to ask for advice about everything from her career to what to wear on dates. Sounds like you did a good job. I hope so. Some days I think I was too focused on work and not present enough. Other days I think I was too involved and didn't teach her enough independence. Parenting is just one long exercise in second-guessing yourself. I paused in my work and looked at her. For what it's worth, from the way you talk about her, it's obvious you care deeply. That counts for a lot. She smiled, a real smile this time. Not the professional one I'd seen earlier. Thank you. That's very kind. Around noon, just as I was getting ready to cut the first replacement board, my circular saw decided to jam, not unusual, but annoying. I spent about 10 minutes trying to clear the blade. Before admitting defeat, problem, Samantha asked, looking up from her laptop. Nothing major. Just need to pick up a new blade. There's a hardware store about 15 minutes away. Actually, she said, closing her laptop. I was just thinking about lunch. Why don't I drive you to the hardware store, and we can grab something to eat on the way back? I know a great sandwich place near there. I hesitated. Having lunch with the client wasn't exactly standard practice, but there was something about Samantha that made normal professional boundaries feel unnecessarily rigid. Are you sure? I don't want to interrupt your workday. Please, she said, already standing up. I've been staring at spreadsheets for 3 hours. I need a break before my brain turns to mush. The drive to the hardware store gave me my first real glimpse of Samantha. Outside her professional element, she drove a silver BMW SUV, practical but elegant, and had excellent taste in music. We listened to jazz standards while she told me about the neighborhood, pointing out houses where interesting people lived and sharing little stories about the community. That's where the Hendersons live, she said, gesturing to a blue Colonial. He's a retired airline pilot. She's a master gardener. They throw the best 4th of July parties. And that house there belongs to a couple who are both professional musicians. Sometimes on summer evenings, they'll open their windows and practice together. It's like having a private concert at the hardware store. She insisted on helping me find the right saw blade, asking intelligent questions about different tooth configurations and cutting speeds. It turned out she'd helped her father with various projects when she was younger, and actually knew quite a bit about tools. My dad was a mechanical engineer, she explained as we stood in the saw blade aisle. He always said that understanding how things work was more important than being able to afford to have someone else fix them. Lunch was at a small cafe called The Daily Grind, the kind of place where they knew regular customers by name and made everything from scratch. Samantha ordered a turkey and avocado wrap. I got a pastrami sandwich, and we found a quiet table by the window. So, she said, taking a sip of her iced tea, 8 years in construction. Did you always know that's what you wanted to do? I found myself telling her about my somewhat unconventional path into the trades. How I'd started college as an engineering major, gotten frustrated with the theoretical aspects, and dropped out to learn carpentry from my uncle. How my parents had been disappointed but eventually came to respect my choice when they saw how much I enjoyed the work. There's something satisfying about building something with your hands, I said. At the end of the day, you can see exactly what you've accomplished. It's tangible in a way that a lot of jobs aren't. I understand that more than you might think, Samantha said. Investment consulting can be very abstract. I help people make smart decisions with their money. But success is usually measured in percentages and portfolio growth. Sometimes I miss having something concrete to show for my efforts. Is that why you're so particular about the house? Having something physical that you can control and improve. She considered this for a moment. Maybe. I never thought about it that way. But you might be right. The house is mine in a way that my work never quite is. As we headed back to her place, I found myself thinking that this was turning out to be one of the more pleasant work days I'd had in a long time, and when Samantha said, "This was fun. We should do it again tomorrow," I realized I was already looking forward to it. The afternoon flew by once we returned from lunch. I fell into a productive rhythm, cutting and fitting the new deck boards while Samantha worked on her laptop nearby. There was something comfortable about having her there, not watching over my shoulder, like some clients did, but just present, occasionally looking up from her work to ask a question or make a comment. Around 4 o'clock, she disappeared inside and returned with 2 glasses of what looked like homemade lemonade. "Thought you might need a break," she said, settling into her chair with her own glass. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and gratefully accepted the drink. It was perfect-tart and sweet with just a hint of mint. "This is incredible. Did you make it yourself?" "Family recipe," she said with a smile. "My grandmother's. She always said that good lemonade required 3 things: fresh lemons, real sugar, and patience. The patience part is letting it sit over night so the flavors can marry properly. Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Raised 6 kids during the Depression, managed the family farm, and still found time to teach Sunday school every week. She's the one who taught me that if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right the first time. I could see where Samantha had gotten her perfectionist tendencies. Is she still around? Passed away about 10 years ago, but I still use her recipes, especially when I want to feel connected to family. Emily loves this lemonade too. When she was little, she used to insist I make it for every birthday party and school event. As the day progressed, our conversations became more personal. Samantha told me about her early years building her consulting business, working 18-hour days and slowly building a client base through word of mouth and sheer determination. I shared stories about some of my more challenging projects, the time I had to rebuild an entire deck in the middle of winter because the original contractor had used substandard materials, or the elderly couple who insisted on bringing me cookies and coffee every hour despite the fact that their kitchen renovation meant they had to climb over sawhorses to reach the oven. "It sounds like you really care about your clients," she observed as I was fitting the last board of the day. "I try to. I mean, for me it's just a job, but for them it's usually their home. That's important to them, so it should be important to me. That's a good philosophy. I try to approach my work the same way. When someone trusts you with their money, they're really trusting you with their future security, their children's education, their retirement. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet." By 6 o'clock, I had made significant progress. About half the deck was now covered with fresh, properly secured boards, and the difference was already dramatic. The new wood was a warm honey color that would weather beautifully over time, and everything was level and tight. "Wow," Samantha said, walking around to inspect the work. "This looks amazing already. Emily's going to be thrilled." "Still have tomorrow to finish up and get everything stained," I said, packing up my tools. "But yeah, it's coming along well." That's when Samantha made the suggestion that would change everything. "Dylan," she said, and there was something different in her tone, more hesitant than her usual confident manner. "I know this might sound a bit forward, but I was wondering if you'd like to stay for dinner. It's the least I can do after you've been working so hard, and to be honest, I was planning to cook anyway, and I always make too much food." I paused in the middle of coiling an extension cord. Having dinner with the client was definitely crossing a line, but the invitation felt genuine, not like she was just being polite. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't be imposing. Actually, I'd enjoy the company. I spend most evenings either working or talking to Emily on the phone. It would be nice to have an actual conversation with another adult." There was something almost vulnerable about the way she said it, like she was admitting to being lonely without actually using the word. In that case, I'd love to stay. "Great." I was planning to make pasta with homemade marinara sauce. Nothing fancy, but it's one of the few things I actually know how to cook well. While Samantha prepared dinner, I cleaned up my tools and stored the remaining lumber in her garage. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden light over the partially completed deck, and I felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond just having done good work. When I came back inside, the kitchen smelled incredible. Samantha had changed into a casual sundress and was stirring a pot of sauce that looked like it had been simmering for hours. "Can I help with anything?" I asked. "You can open that bottle of wine if you want," she said, gesturing toward a bottle of red wine on the counter. I figured we both earned it. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with copper pots hanging from a rack above the island and herbs growing in small pots on the windowsill. Everything was organized but lived in, the kind of space that clearly got used regularly. "This is a beautiful kitchen," I said as I worked the cork out of the wine bottle. Thank you. I had it renovated about 5 years ago. Spent months agonizing over every detail, cabinet hardware, countertop material, the exact shade of white for the walls. Emily still teases me about how I made the contractor move the island 3 times before I was satisfied with the placement. 3 times. Don't judge me, she said with a laugh. I told you I have control issues. We ate at the kitchen table with candles flickering between us and jazz playing softly from a speaker in the corner. The pasta was perfect, the wine was excellent, and the conversation flowed as easily as it had during our lunch earlier. So tell me about your family, Samantha said. Are your parents still disappointed that you didn't finish college? Not really disappointed anymore, but they still don't quite understand. My dad's a CPA. My mom's a high school principal. They're good people, but they've always measured success in terms of degrees and salary ranges. The idea of choosing a blue-collar job by choice rather than necessity is foreign to them. Do you regret not finishing? I consider the question seriously, sometimes. Not because I want a different career, but because I think education is valuable for its own sake. I read a lot on my own, but there's something to be said for structured learning. You could always go back, she said. Evening classes, online programs. It's never too late to learn something new. Maybe. What about you? Any regrets about your path? Samantha twirled pasta around her fork thoughtfully. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd been braver when I was younger. I played it safe for a long time, married young, had Emily right away, built my career very methodically. I never really took any big risks or followed any wild dreams. What kind of wild dreams? Oh, nothing too dramatic. I always wanted to travel more, maybe live abroad for a while. I thought about writing a book once, and there was a time when I seriously considered chucking everything and opening a small hotel somewhere beautiful and remote. What stopped you? Responsibility, mostly. Emily needed stability. The business required constant attention. And honestly, I think I was scared. It's easier to stick with what you know than to venture into the unknown. As the evening wore on, I found myself more and more reluctant to leave. There was something about Samantha's company that felt completely natural, like talking to an old friend rather than someone I just met. When she suggested we take our wine out to the finished portion of the deck to watch the stars, I didn't hesitate to say yes. We ended up talking on the deck until well past midnight. The conversation ranged from serious topics like our respective career paths and life philosophies to lighter subjects, like favorite movies and travel destinations. Samantha was an excellent storyteller, with a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard more than once. Around 12:30, I finally stood up to leave, realizing I'd stayed much longer than was probably appropriate. I should get going, I said, checking my watch. Long drive home, and I want to get an early start tomorrow. How long is the drive? She asked. About 45 minutes. Or if there's traffic. Samantha frowned. Dylan, you've had the glasses of wine. I know it was over several hours, but still. I feel terrible if something happened to you on the way home. I was about to protest that I was fine to drive when she continued. Look, I have a guest room that never gets used. Why don't you just stay here tonight? You can get an early start in the morning, and I'll feel better knowing you got home safely. I hesitated. Staying overnight at a client's house was definitely crossing into uncharted territory, but the wine had left me feeling relaxed. The conversation had been genuinely enjoyable, and the prospect of a 45-minute drive on winding country roads wasn't particularly appealing. Are you sure it wouldn't be an imposition? Not at all. The guest room has its own bathroom, and I can lend you a toothbrush and whatever else you need. It's really no trouble. 20 minutes later, I found myself in a comfortable guest bedroom with clean towels, a new toothbrush, and a pair of pajama pants that Samantha had insisted I borrow. They belonged to my ex-husband, she'd explained without any apparent awkwardness. He left them here years ago, and they've just been taken up to her space. The room was decorated in soft blues and whites, with nautical touches that gave it a peaceful, coastal feel. There was a stack of books on the nightstand, mostly business and self-help titles, but also a few novels. I picked up one of them, a literary thriller I'd been meaning to read, and settled in for a few minutes of reading before sleep. I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon, and the sound of quiet music drifting out from downstairs. For a moment, I was disoriented. The unfamiliar room and the domestic sounds from below created an odd sense of déjà vu, like I was remembering someone else's life. I checked my phone, 7:15 a.m. I'd slept better than I had in weeks. After getting dressed and making the bed, I headed downstairs to find Samantha in the kitchen, already dressed for work and moving efficiently between the stove and counter. She'd clearly been up for a while. The newspaper was folded beside her coffee cup, and she had that alert, caffeinated look of someone who was definitely a morning person. "Good morning," she said with a smile. "Hope you slept well." I wasn't sure what you liked for breakfast, so I made a little of everything. The kitchen island was set up like a small buffet: scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, toast, and what looked like homemade coffee cake. It was more food than I usually ate in a week, let alone for breakfast. "This is incredible," I said, genuinely amazed. "When did you have time to make all this?" "I'm always up early. Usually I just have coffee and read the news, but I figured, since I had a guest, I should make an effort. Besides, I enjoy cooking when I have a reason to do it." We ate breakfast together while she told me about her schedule for the day: client calls, a meeting with a potential new account, and a conference call with colleagues in London. Her energy was infectious. Even at 7 in the morning, she seemed fully engaged with the world around her. "What about you?" she asked. "How are you planning to tackle the rest of the deck?" "Finish installing the remaining boards this morning, then start on the staining process. If everything goes according to plan, I should be completely done by late afternoon." Perfect timing. Emily's coming over this weekend to help me start planning the party details. She'll be so excited to see the finished deck. As I prepared to head outside and start work, Samantha handed me a travel mug filled with coffee. "For later," she said. "I made it strong, the way construction workers supposedly like it." "How do you know how construction workers like their coffee?" "I don't," she admitted with a laugh. "But my dad always said that people who work with their hands need fuel. That means business." I was halfway through setting up my tools when Rena appeared at the fence, coffee cup in hand and a knowing look on her face. Well, she said, not bothering to hide her amusement. "Someone's truck spent the night in the driveway." I felt my face flush. "I stayed in the guest room." Samantha was concerned about me driving home after having wine with dinner. Rena said, clearly not buying the completely innocent explanation. "And how was dinner?" "It was nice," I said, then immediately regretted how defensive that sounded. "I'll bet it was." Samantha's an excellent cook when she puts her mind to it. She doesn't usually bother for just anyone, though. Before I could figure out how to respond to that, Samantha appeared on the deck with her laptop and work bag. "Good morning, Rena," she called out cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Indeed it is," Rena replied, her tone suggesting she found the whole situation highly entertaining. "I was just telling Dylan what a good cook you are." "Were you now?" Samantha said, shooting her neighbor a look that was equal parts amused and warning. "Don't you have some flowers to tend to?" "Actually, I do. But Dylan, before I go, make sure you get Samantha to show you her garden before you leave. She's too modest to mention it, but she grows the best tomatoes in the neighborhood." With that, Rena disappeared back into her yard, leaving Samantha and me alone on the deck. "Sorry about that," Samantha said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Rena means well, but she has a talent for making perfectly innocent situations sound scandalous." "It's fine," I said, though I was still processing Rena's comment about Samantha not usually bothering to cook for just anyone. Should I be worried about the neighborhood gossip mill in Willowbrook? Absolutely. By this afternoon, half the neighborhood will be convinced we're having a torrid affair, and the other half will have us secretly married. But honestly, I stopped caring what people think about my personal life years ago. There was something liberating about her attitude, a confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and being comfortable with it. As I watched her settle into her usual chair with her laptop and coffee, I found myself thinking that spending the night here had felt surprisingly natural, like a glimpse of what a different kind of life might look like. The second day of work proceeded, with a rhythm that felt almost domestic. Samantha moved seamlessly between her professional calls and casual conversations with me, creating an atmosphere that was both productive and relaxed. I found myself working more efficiently than usual, partly because I was energized by the excellent breakfast and strong coffee, but mostly because I was genuinely enjoying the environment. Around mid-morning, a delivery truck pulled up with what appeared to be party supplies. Samantha signed for several boxes and enlisted my help carrying them into the house. "Emily's already started ordering things," she explained as we stacked boxes in the living room. "She's supposed to wait until she sees the finished deck, but apparently she couldn't resist getting some of the basics ordered." I glanced at the return labels: a party rental company, a specialty lighting supplier, and what looked like a florist. She's certainly thorough. That's one way to put it. Emily approaches party planning the same way she approaches marketing. Campaigns with detailed spreadsheets and contingency plans for contingencies. I keep telling her it's supposed to be a celebration, not a military operation. But you're proud of her attention to detail. Absolutely. It's just funny to watch. Your child developed personality traits that you recognize in yourself, but carry to an even greater extreme. As I returned to work on the deck, I could hear Samantha on various phone calls throughout the morning. Her professional voice was crisp and authoritative, but I noticed she had a different tone for different types of calls. With older clients, she was more patient and explanatory. With younger ones, she was more direct and challenging. With colleagues, she was collaborative but clearly confident in her opinions. During a break around 11, she brought out iced tea and asked about my business. "Do you work mostly in this area?" she asked, settling into what had become her usual chair. "Within about a 50-mile radius. I like staying local. It means I can really get to know the communities I work in, and word of mouth travels better in smaller areas." "That makes sense. Have you ever thought about expanding, hiring employees, taking on bigger projects?" I considered the question while sanding a rough edge on one of the boards. "Sometimes. There's definitely demand for it. But I'm not sure I want the headaches that come with managing other people right now. If something goes wrong, it's my responsibility, and I can fix it. If I had a crew, I'd be spending more time managing and less time actually building." The classic small business dilemma, she said. Growth versus control. I see it with my clients all the time. They want their businesses to succeed, but they're afraid that success will change the thing they love about what they do. Exactly. What do you usually advise them? It depends on what they really want. Some people are builders at heart. They love the process of creation. Others are entrepreneurs who get energized by growth and challenge. The key is being honest about which one you are. And which one are you? She laughed. Probably a little of both, which is why I've stayed in consulting rather than starting my own investment firm. I get to help build other people's financial futures without having to manage a large organization myself. By lunchtime, I had completed all the board replacement and was ready to start the staining process. The transformation was already dramatic. What had been a weathered, uneven surface was now a smooth, solid platform that would serve Emily's party guests well. "Want to see something?" Samantha asked as I was cleaning my brushes. She led me around to the side of the house where a small but beautifully maintained vegetable garden was thriving. Neat rows of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs were organized with the same attention to detail I noticed in her house. "Rena wasn't kidding about your tomatoes," I said, examining the heavy clusters of fruit. "These are incredible. It's my one completely non-professional hobby," she said, clearly pleased by my admiration. "No spreadsheets, no client management, no quarterly projections. Just dirt, seeds, and patience. It's beautiful. Do you do all the work yourself?" "Every bit. Emily thinks I'm crazy for spending my weekends weeding and watering. But there's something satisfying about growing something with your own hands." She paused, then looked at me with a slight smile. "I guess we have that in common. The satisfaction of physical work, the satisfaction of creating something tangible. Something you can point to and say, 'I made that.'" As we walked back toward the deck, I found myself thinking about the parallels between her garden and my construction work. Both required planning, patience, and attention to detail. Both resulted in something that could be enjoyed by others. And both provided a kind of satisfaction that was hard to find in purely intellectual pursuits. "Dylan," she said as I prepared to start applying the first coat of stain, "can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Are you happy? I mean, really happy with your life?" The question caught me off guard, partly because of its directness and partly because I wasn't sure how to answer it. "That's a complicated question," I said, dipping my brush into the stain. "I enjoy my work. I'm financially stable. I have good health. By most measures, I should be happy. But sometimes I feel like I'm just going through the motions. Work, home, rinse and repeat. I don't have many close relationships, and I sometimes wonder if I'm missing something important." She nodded thoughtfully. "I know exactly what you mean. Success can be isolating, especially when you're self-employed. You achieve your goals, but there's no one to really share the achievement with. Is that how you feel?" "Sometimes. Emily's wonderful, but she has her own life now. My work colleagues are professional relationships, not personal ones. And most of the men I meet," she trailed off. "What about them? They're either intimidated by my success or they see me as a challenge to be conquered. Very few of them seem interested in me as a person." There was something vulnerable about her admission, a crack in the confident facade she usually maintained. I found myself wanting to reassure her, but I wasn't sure what to say. "For what it's worth," I said, focusing on applying the stain in smooth, even strokes. You seem like someone who would be easy to be interested in as a person. You're intelligent, funny, thoughtful. Any man who can't see that probably isn't worth your time. When I glanced up, she was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you might think. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the deck as I applied the final coat of stain. The transformation was remarkable. What had started as a weathered, neglected surface was now a beautiful, welcoming space that would be perfect for Emily's engagement party. The rich honey color of the new boards blended seamlessly with the restored original sections, and everything was level, secure, and ready for years of use. Samantha had been unusually quiet during the afternoon, working on her laptop but glancing up frequently to watch my progress. There was something different about her demeanor, less of the confident executive, and more of someone wrestling with unspoken thoughts. Around 4 o'clock, as I was cleaning my brushes for the final time, she closed her laptop and came to stand at the railing I had reinforced the day before. It's beautiful, she said, running her hand along the smooth wood. Better than I ever imagined it could be. Thank you. It was a good project, solid foundation, quality materials. Sometimes that's all you need to make something really special. She nodded, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere. We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both admiring the completed work and perhaps recognizing that this moment marked the end of something that had become unexpectedly meaningful. Dylan, she said finally, her voice softer than usual. Can I tell you something? Of course. She leaned against the railing, looking out over her garden rather than at me. When I called you about this job, I was going through one of those periods where everything felt routine and predictable. Emily's engagement was wonderful news, but it also made me realize how settled my life had become. Not settled in a good way, settled in a way that felt like I was just waiting for time to pass. I stopped cleaning my brush and gave her my full attention. These past 2 days have been different, she continued. Having you here, talking about everything from business philosophy to family recipes, to what makes us happy, it's reminded me what it feels like to connect with someone. Really connect, not just make polite conversation or discuss quarterly projections. There was something vulnerable in her posture, a hesitation that was completely unlike the confident woman I'd come to know. Samantha, let me finish, she said, turning to face me directly. I know this is probably inappropriate. You came here to fix my deck, not to listen to a middle-aged woman have some kind of emotional revelation. But I need to say this. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady, but charged with emotion. I'm 51 years old, Dylan. I've been married and divorced. I've built a successful career. I've raised a daughter. I've learned a lot about what doesn't work in relationships. And I've become very good at protecting myself from disappointment. But I've also learned something else. I've learned not to let good men walk away without telling them what they mean to me. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just casual flirtation or misplaced gratitude for good work. This was something much more honest and brave. The truth is, she continued, her eyes never leaving mine, you've made me feel more alive in today's than I have in years. You listen when I talk. You're interested in what I think. You make me laugh. You're kind and talented and genuine. And you don't seem to need me to be anything other than exactly who I am. I set down my brush and tools, giving her the attention this moment deserved. When I was younger, she said, I let fear make too many decisions for me. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of looking foolish. I've spent the last 10 years telling myself that being practical and safe was the same thing as being wise. But watching you work these past 2 days, seeing how much care you put into everything you do, listening to you talk about what matters to you, it's made me realize that the biggest risk isn't opening your heart to someone. The biggest risk is never opening it at all. She paused, and I could see her gathering courage for whatever came next. I don't know what you're thinking right now, she said. I don't know if you feel any of the same connection I do, or if I'm completely misreading the situation. But I couldn't let you drive away without telling you that these 2 days have meant something to me. You've meant something to me. The silence that followed was charged with possibility. I found myself looking at this remarkable woman, intelligent, successful, beautiful, brave enough to put herself out there despite the risk of rejection, and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just attraction, though that was certainly part of it, but a sense of recognition, like I'd been waiting for this conversation, this moment, this person, without even knowing it. Samantha, I said finally, stepping closer to her. I need you to know that you haven't misread anything. These 2 days have been extraordinary. Not because of the work, but because of you. I watched her shoulders relax slightly, some of the tension leaving her posture. I came here expecting to replace some deck boards and collect a paycheck, I continued. Instead, I've spent days with someone who challenges me to think differently. Who makes me want to be better at what I do. Who makes me laugh and makes me feel like I'm interesting enough to be worth listening to. You are, she said softly. And you're remarkable, I replied. Not just successful or accomplished, though you're certainly both of those things. You're warm and funny and thoughtful and brave. Brave enough to open your home to a stranger. Brave enough to stay up talking until midnight. And brave enough to say what you just said. She smiled then, the first genuine, unguarded smile I'd seen from her all day. So what happens now? She asked. I looked around at the beautiful deck we were standing on, at the garden she'd shown me with such pride, at the house where I'd spent one of the most comfortable nights I could remember. Then I looked back at her, at this woman who had somehow become central to my thoughts in just 2 days. I think, I said. That depends on whether you'd be interested in having dinner with me tonight. Not as a client and contractor, but as to people who might want to see where this connection leads. Her smile widened. I thought you'd never ask. That evening, Samantha, I said finally, stepping closer to her. I need you to know that you haven't misread anything. These 2 days have been extraordinary. Not because of the work, but because of you. I watched her shoulders relax slightly, some of the tension leaving her posture. I came here expecting to replace some deck boards and collect a paycheck, I continued. Instead, I've spent days with someone who challenges me to think differently. Who makes me want to be better at what I do. Who makes me laugh and makes me feel like I'm interesting enough to be worth listening to. You are, she said softly. And you're remarkable, I replied. Not just successful or accomplished, though you're certainly both of those things. You're warm and funny and thoughtful and brave. Brave enough to open your home to a stranger. Brave enough to stay up talking until midnight. And brave enough to say what you just said. She smiled then, the first genuine, unguarded smile I'd seen from her all day. So what happens now? She asked. I looked around at the beautiful deck we were standing on, at the garden she'd shown me with such pride, at the house where I'd spent one of the most comfortable nights I could remember. Then I looked back at her, at this woman who had somehow become central to my thoughts in just 2 days. I think, I said. That depends on whether you'd be interested in having dinner with me tonight. Not as a client and contractor, but as to people who might want to see where this connection leads. Her smile widened. I thought you'd never ask. That evening marked the beginning of something neither of us had quite expected. What started as dinner became a long conversation that stretched past midnight, much like the night before, but with a completely different energy. There was no longer any pretense about professional boundaries or client relationships. We were simply two people who had found something rare and were brave enough to explore it. I should probably call in some help tomorrow, I said as we sat on the newly finished deck, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars emerge. I have another job scheduled, but I'm not sure I'm ready to leave Willowbrook just yet. What kind of help? Samantha asked, curled up in her chair with a light sweater draped over her shoulders. My friend Alvin runs a small crew. He owes me a favor from last spring when I helped him finish a kitchen renovation that was running behind schedule. I could ask him to handle the start of the next project while I figure some things out. Things like what? I looked at her. This woman who had somehow shifted from client to friend to something much more significant in just 2 days. Things like whether a successful investment consultant and a contractor can find enough common ground to build something meaningful together. She was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in her glass. You know, what's funny? I've spent years advising people about risk management and portfolio diversification, always telling them not to put all their eggs in one basket, to hedge their bets, to have exit strategies. And now I'm thinking that maybe the biggest risk is not investing enough in the things that really matter. The next morning, Samantha suggested we drive into town for breakfast at a place she'd mentioned wanting to try. After breakfast, we walked through the downtown area, which was compact but clearly thriving. Local shops, a small bookstore, a coffee roastery that filled the air with the smell of fresh beans. Samantha knew most of the shop owners and stopped to chat with several of them. You should meet Dylan, she told the woman who ran the bookstore. He's the one who rebuilt my deck. Beautiful work. Nice to meet you, the woman said, shaking my hand. I'm always looking for good contractors. My upstairs apartment needs some shelving built. By the time we made it back to her house, I had 3 potential job leads and Samantha was looking at me with obvious amusement. What? I asked. You just got more business referrals in 2 hours than most contractors get in a month. Is that how things work around here? If people like you and trust you, yes. Reputation travels fast in small towns, but so does opportunity. That afternoon, while Samantha worked on some client reports, I called Alvin to arrange coverage for my next project. He was curious about the change in plans but agreed without asking too many questions. Just don't do anything stupid, he said before hanging up. Good contractors are hard to find, but good women are harder. Emily called around 4 o'clock, excited to see photos of the finished deck and eager to finalize party details. I could hear her voice through Samantha's phone as they discussed catering options and guest list. Who's that in the background? Emily asked, and I realized she could hear me talking to Rena over the fence about her garden irrigation system. That's Dylan, the contractor who fixed the deck, Samantha said, and I noticed she didn't add any qualifiers about the job being finished or our relationship being purely professional. He's still there. How long does it take to fix a deck? Apparently longer than I thought, Samantha replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. After Samantha finished her call with Emily, she found me in the kitchen where I was attempting to figure out her coffee machine. Emily wants to meet you, she said. She's driving up this weekend to see the deck and start setting up decorations. How do you feel about that? Nervous, she admitted. Emily's very protective of me. She still hasn't entirely forgiven her father for the divorce, even though it was completely mutual and happened 9 years ago. And she's going to think I'm taking advantage of her vulnerable mother. Something like that. Or she's going to think I'm having some kind of midlife crisis and making impulsive decisions. I handed her a cup of coffee that actually looked properly brewed. Are you having a midlife crisis? She considered the question seriously. I don't think so. A midlife crisis is usually about trying to recapture your youth or denying reality. This feels more like the opposite, like I'm finally old enough and wise enough to recognize something valuable when I see it. And what do you see? I see a man who works with integrity, who listens more than he talks, who makes me laugh and makes me think. I see someone who's interested in building something lasting rather than just collecting experiences. That evening, we cooked dinner together, Samantha handling the more complex techniques while I managed the simpler tasks under her guidance. Working in the kitchen felt surprisingly natural, like we'd done this many times before. You know, she said as we cleaned up afterward, I can't remember the last time I cooked for someone just because I wanted to. Not because I was entertaining clients or hosting a business dinner. I can't remember the last time someone wanted to cook for me, I replied. We were standing close together at the sink, and she turned to look at me with an expression that was both serious and tender. Dylan, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Okay, is this moving too fast for you? I know we've only known each other for 3 days, but it feels like longer. It feels important, and I don't want to pressure you into something you're not ready for. I dried my hands and turned to face her fully. Samantha, I'm 32 years old. I've had relationships that lasted months where I never felt as comfortable or connected as I do with you right now. Fast and wrong are two different things. She smiled, and I could see relief in her eyes. Besides, I added, you're the one who said you've learned not to let good men walk away. I did say that, didn't I? You did. And I'm not walking anywhere. The weekend brought Emily's arrival, and with it, a test neither Samantha nor I had quite prepared for. Emily Reed was every bit her mother's daughter, sharp, observant, and protective in a way that was both admirable and slightly intimidating. She arrived Saturday morning with a car full of party supplies, and what was clearly a predetermined opinion about finding a strange man still hanging around her mother's house. So you're the contractor, she said when Samantha introduced us. Her handshake firm, but her smile reserved. Mom says you do excellent work. I try to, I replied. Sensing the underlying assessment taking place, Emily walked around the deck with the kind of attention to detail I recognized from her mother, testing the railings, examining the stain job, checking corners where problems might typically hide. Finally, she nodded approvingly. This is beautiful work, she admitted. Really beautiful. Mom wasn't exaggerating. Over the course of the morning, as we worked together setting up tables and arranging lighting, Emily's protective shell began to crack. She asked thoughtful questions about my business, my background, my plans. More importantly, she watched how I interacted with her mother, how we moved around each other in the kitchen, how we finished each other's sentences, how Samantha laughed at my terrible jokes. You know, Emily said to me privately while Samantha was inside taking a business call, I haven't seen my mother this happy in years. She's pretty remarkable, I said. She is. She's also been hurt before. Not just by my father, by men who said they could handle her success, but couldn't actually deal with being with someone stronger than they were. The warning was clear. and I respected her for it. Emily, I'm not threatened by your mother's success. If anything, it's one of the things I admire most about her. Good, she said simply. Because if you hurt her, you'll have to answer to me. That afternoon, the three of us drove to the farmer's market, and I watched Samantha and Emily together, the easy banter, the shared jokes, the obvious deep affection between them. It struck me that if this relationship with Samantha continued, Emily would become an important part of my life too. Dylan, Emily said as we were loading vegetables into the car, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you planning to stick around, not just for the weekend, but really stick around? I glanced at Samantha, who was pretending not to listen while examining a display of fresh herbs. I hope so. If your mother will have me, she will. Emily said with confidence. The question is whether you're ready for what that means. My mother doesn't do anything halfway. If she decides she wants you in her life, she's going to want all of you, your dreams, your plans, your future. Are you ready for that kind of investment? That evening, after Emily had gone to her hotel, Samantha and I sat on the deck with wine and the comfortable silence of two people who had survived an important test. She likes you, Samantha said finally. How can you tell? Because she stopped interrogating you and started planning how to include you in family events. Did you notice how she started talking about when you come to Christmas dinner instead of if you come? I had noticed. And how do you feel about that? Samantha turned to face me, her expression serious but warm. I feel like I'm 51 years old, and I finally found someone worth taking risks for. What kind of risks? The risk of changing my carefully ordered life. The risk of depending on someone else for my happiness. The risk of letting Emily see me vulnerable again. She paused. The risk of love. The word hung between us, finally spoken aloud. Samantha, I said, reaching for her hand, I'm falling in love with you too. She smiled. The kind of smile that changes everything. Good. Because I've learned not to let good men walk away. And I'm not about to start now. I'm Rena Blackwood, and I've been watching this story unfold from my kitchen window for the better part of 6 months. Now, as a retired federal judge, I've seen enough human nature to recognize something special when it appears in my quiet neighborhood. What started as a simple deck repair job became one of those rare love stories that actually makes sense. The engagement party was a beautiful success. Emily had worried for weeks about every detail, but watching her mother and Dylan work together to make everything perfect, she finally understood what Samantha had found. 40 guests celebrated on that newly restored deck, and I couldn't help but notice how naturally Dylan fit into Samantha's world, chatting easily with her colleagues, helping serve drinks, making sure elderly guests had comfortable seating. You know, Emily said to me during the party, I was prepared to hate him. I thought he was either after mom's money or going through some kind of midlife crisis himself. And now I think he might be the best thing that's happened to her in years. Dylan officially moved in with Samantha 2 months after the party. It happened gradually, the way the best changes do. A few tools left in the garage, clothes appearing in the guest room closet, his truck becoming a permanent fixture in the driveway. They didn't make a big announcement. They just became a couple that belonged together. I watched them establish new routines. Morning coffee on the deck before Samantha's first business calls, evening walks through the neighborhood, weekend projects that combined his building skills with her planning expertise. They converted part of the garage into a proper workshop for Dylan, and he started taking on more local jobs, building the kind of reputation that comes from word-of-mouth recommendations in a small community. But the most remarkable thing wasn't how well they fit together, it was how they each became more themselves. Samantha's laughter became more frequent, her rigid schedules more flexible. She started cooking more, entertaining more, taking time for things that had nothing to do with quarterly projections. Dylan, meanwhile, discovered that he enjoyed the intellectual challenges Samantha brought to his work. They would spend hours discussing business strategies, market trends, and long-term planning in ways that energized both of them. He makes me want to take more risks, Samantha told me one afternoon as we worked in our adjacent gardens. Not reckless ones, but calculated risks that might lead to something better. And what does he get from you? I asked. Stability, I think. Confidence that someone believes in his potential. And maybe a push to think bigger about what his life could look like. 6 months later, they announced their engagement. Not a dramatic proposal, but a quiet conversation that led to a mutual decision to build something permanent together. Emily cried happy tears and immediately began planning another party for the deck that had brought them together. As I write this, they're in the backyard discussing plans for a small addition to the house, a combination office and workshop, where they can both pursue their work while staying connected. Dylan sketching rough blueprints while Samantha calculates cost and timelines. It's exactly the kind of practical romanticism I would have expected from them. Some love stories are about passion that burns bright and fast. Others, like this one, are about two mature people who recognize something valuable and have the wisdom to nurture it. Samantha was right when she said she learned not to let good men walk away. And Dylan was wise enough to recognize a woman who knew her own worth. They still use that deck every evening, sharing wine and conversation as the sun sets. Sometimes I see them dancing to music from her phone, other times sitting in comfortable silence. They've created something that feels both exciting and sustainable, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of deep affection that comes from really knowing someone. At 51 and 32, they prove that love doesn't follow a schedule or care about conventional timelines. Sometimes the best relationships happen when two people are finally ready to be completely honest about what they want and brave enough to reach for it. From my kitchen window, watching them build their life together, one conversation and one shared meal at a time, I can say with confidence that some risks are absolutely worth taking. Up next, you've got more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.